Tuesday, March 4th, 6:17 in the evening. I know the exact time because I had just glanced at the clock on my truck's dashboard and thought to myself, 11 more minutes, and I'll be home. I'd spent the better part of that Tuesday driving my son and his wife back to Portland International after their week-long visit, and I was carrying the particular exhaustion of a man who has been performing cheerfulness for 7 days straight. 63 years old, and I still hadn't learned how to say I'm tired without feeling like an apology. I had no idea that before I reached my own driveway, a single text message from a woman I'd known for 14 years would pull the floor out from under everything I thought was solid. I'm going to tell you exactly what I found. And I'm going to tell you exactly what I did about it. Because I didn't shout. I didn't put my fist through a wall. And by the time it was finished, I didn't need to. My name is Walter Greer. I'm 63, recently retired after 31 years running a mid-sized logistics company out of Salem, Oregon. The kind of company that moves medical equipment between hospitals and never makes the news, but paid for 2 kids' college tuitions and a mortgage that's finally paid off. My flaw, and I'll put it plainly because there's no dignity in hiding it at my age, is that I extended trust the way I extended credit to good customers, freely, without a lot of verification, because the idea that someone I loved would lie to me flat out never quite fit into the way I understood the world. I signed things my attorney should have reviewed first. I handed passwords to people who smiled at me every morning. I believed that longevity was the same thing as loyalty. It is not. But let me tell you about Margaret before I tell you about the rest, because you won't understand why that text message shook me the way it did until you understand who she was. Margaret Osei had been our property manager for 14 years. She and her husband Gerald had moved from Accra to Salem in the late 90s, and she came recommended by a colleague of mine who said simply, "She's the most reliable person I've ever hired." He was right. Margaret managed the 2 rental properties my wife Diane and I owned across town, a 4-unit apartment building on Cascade Drive and a duplex on Fairview. And in 14 years, she had never once been late with the town, monthly accounting sheets, never once failed to return a call within 2 hours, never once hired a contractor without getting 3 separate quotes. She kept a logbook, handwritten, in a green canvas binder, where she noted every repair request, every tenant complaint, every utility bill, down to the dollar. Nobody asked her to keep that logbook. She just kept it. She brought it to every meeting the way other people bring coffee, and she'd set it on the table and open it to the right page before you even finished sitting down. There was a ritual she had, and I only understood later how much that small habit would matter, where she would send me a brief text every Tuesday evening. Nothing more than a summary of the week's activity on both properties. 3 or 4 lines. Just enough to tell me everything was running the way it should. That Tuesday, the text I received was not 3 or 4 lines. I was on Route 99W, doing 52 in a 55 when my phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I don't read texts while driving. That's one rule I kept without exception, so I waited until I reached the Chevron station off Rickey Street and pulled in. The text from Margaret read, "Mr. Greer, before you go home tonight, I need you to call me. Please don't go inside until we've spoken. I've seen something today you need to know about. I'm so sorry." I sat there under the fluorescent lights of that gas station with the engine idling and read it 3 times. Margaret Osei did not use the phrase "I'm so sorry" lightly. In 14 years of working together, I could count on one hand the times she'd expressed anything resembling alarm. I called her back immediately. She picked up on the second ring. Her voice was steady but careful, the way a person sounds when they're choosing every word and setting it down gently before picking up the next one. She told me she had stopped by the Cascade Drive property that afternoon to meet a plumber for a routine inspection. The plumber had been late, so she'd been sitting in her car in the parking area adjacent to the building for nearly 40 minutes. During that time, she had seen my wife Diane's white Volvo pull into the lot. She had started to get out to say hello. And then she had seen my business partner of 11 years, a man named Craig Hollis, get out of the passenger side. She said they were laughing. She said they walked into Unit 3 together. She said the door closed. She said the plumber arrived 18 minutes later. She said Diane's car was still there. She said Craig's car was still there. She said she didn't know what to do with what she was seeing, so she did the thing that felt most like the truth. She called me. Then, she told me something I have turned over in my mind almost every day since. Mr. Greer, you have always treated Gerald and me like people who mattered. Not everyone does that. I didn't feel like I had the right to stay quiet. I sat in that Chevron parking lot for 14 minutes without moving. A teenager in a red Honda pulled up to the pump next to me, filled his tank, drove away. I didn't notice him arrive, and I barely noticed him leave. I was thinking about Craig Hollis. Craig, who had been my business partner since I was 52, and he was 44. Craig, who had a framed photo of the two of us at a Blazers game on his office wall and called it the partnership portrait. Craig, who had given a toast at my 60th birthday party about loyalty being the only currency that didn't lose its value. I did not drive home. I texted Diane that I was staying over near the airport, told her I was too wrung out to make the full drive, which was not entirely untrue, just not entirely complete either. I checked into a Marriott Courtyard on Airport Way, sat on the edge of the bed with my reading glasses on, and thought about everything I actually knew about my own financial situation. And here is where the story takes a turn that I am not proud of taking so long to understand. Greer Logistics had been fully in my name when I started it, but 3 years earlier, when I was preparing what I thought was a graceful transition toward retirement, Craig and I had restructured the company's operating agreement. I had given Craig a 30% ownership stake in exchange for his agreeing to manage daily operations through the transition. I had trusted him with the operating accounts. I had trusted him with vendor relationships. I had trusted him with the kind of access you give a man you have watched work honestly for a decade. The restructuring documents were complex, and I had signed them after one read-through with my accountant, a perfectly decent man named Phil who specialized in small business tax prep, not contract law. I had told myself I'd have an attorney review the full language eventually. I had not done that yet. Wednesday morning, 8:42. I called a business attorney named Patricia Vance, who had handled a contract dispute for me 7 years earlier and whose card I'd kept in the leather folder in my desk drawer ever since. I told her what I knew. She was quiet for a moment, and then she asked me 2 questions that reordered everything. Walter, do you have a copy of the operating agreement you signed 3 years ago? And do you have Margaret's logbook? I had a scanned copy of the agreement on my personal email. Margaret, when I called and asked, told me she had kept every copy of every document related to the properties for the past 14 years: leases, repair invoices, contractor agreements, and yes, every single monthly accounting sheet I had ever sent her. She drove them to Patricia's office herself that same afternoon in a cardboard box, the green logbook sitting on top. Patricia called me Thursday morning with her initial findings. The operating agreement had a clause buried in Section 11, subsection C, a paragraph and a half of language I had skimmed that allowed either partner to initiate a buyout valuation process by notifying the other partner in writing with 30 days' notice. What Patricia found, in the company's registered document filings with the Oregon Secretary of State's office, was that Craig had submitted that written notice 9 days earlier. The 30-day clock was already running. The valuation method specified in the clause used a formula based on a rolling 18-month revenue average, and Craig, who had been managing the books, had structured the last 6 months of vendor contracts in ways that artificially suppressed the reported revenue, which would lower the company's valuation, which would lower what he'd be required to pay me in a buyout. It was not crude forgery. It was quiet, patient manipulation by a man who understood exactly which numbers to move and how slowly to move them. I want to tell you something honest about those first few days, because I think it matters. I did not feel powerful. I did not feel like a man with a plan. I felt like a 63-year-old who had spent 31 years building something real and had been sitting next to a man who was calculating its price tag and timing his exit. What I felt, underneath the anger, was something closer to grief. For the friendship I'd thought was real, for the Saturday mornings watching basketball, the long drives to client sites where we'd stop for bad diner coffee and talk about our kids, for the version of Craig Hollis I had understood him to be, which had apparently not been the true version at all. I let myself feel that for exactly 2 days. And then I made a decision that I think was the right one, though it is not the one everyone would make in my position. I decided not to tell Diane I knew anything yet, not because I was protecting her, because I needed to understand the full shape of what was happening before I reacted to any part of it. Patricia worked methodically and without hurry. On day 5, she found a second issue. Craig had used his signatory authority on the operating account to open what appeared to be a vendor payment account at a regional bank, an account whose statements were not going to the company address, but to a P.O. box registered in Craig's name. 3 transfers over 4 months. Nothing large enough to trigger automatic review. Just enough, taken together, to tell a clean story. Patricia brought in a forensic accountant named Dennis, a quiet man who wore the same gray cardigan to every meeting and spoke in the measured, precise cadences of someone who had testified in court more times than he could remember. Dennis confirmed by day 8 that the suppressed revenue figures were intentional, documented the pattern in a report that ran to 22 pages with appendices, and gave me a phrase that I wrote on the hotel notepad that night and still have. This is not a mistake. This is a strategy. On day 9, Patricia contacted the Oregon Department of Justice's Financial Crimes Division. I want to be clear about this, because I think it matters, and because I think the man in the original version of this kind of story sometimes makes the wrong call. I pressed charges. I did it not out of rage, not out of wanting to watch Craig suffer, but because what he had done was a crime, and pretending otherwise would have made me complicit in letting it happen to the next person. The detective assigned to the case was a woman named Sandra Cho. She was efficient, unhurried, and told me in our first meeting, "We see this more often than you'd think. Thank you for not burying it." Day 10. I came home. Diane was in the kitchen when I walked in, and whatever she read in my face made her set down the coffee mug she was holding without putting it all the way on the counter. I did not yell. I had not yelled once through any of this, and I was not going to start now. I laid 3 things on the kitchen table. First, the printed page from Patricia's file showing the date, time, and location of Diane's visit to Cascade Drive Unit 3. Second, a text exchange between Diane and Craig that Patricia had subpoenaed as part of the Civil Action 20 messages, some of them going back 8 months. Third, a single sheet of paper showing the restructured ownership of Greer Logistics as of 2 days prior, 100% held in a family trust in my name, with our daughter Rebecca named as beneficiary, and Patricia named as trustee, a restructuring that Craig's buyout clause could not touch because the filing had been completed before his 30-day window closed. Diane stood very still for a long moment. She started to speak. I told her, quietly, that she didn't need to explain anything to me that evening, that I already understood what had happened and what it meant, and that whatever conversation we needed to have about our marriage, we could have with attorneys present and at a time of her choosing, but that the conversation about my company was already over. She sat down at the table slowly, the way someone sits when they're not sure the chair will hold. She asked me, in a voice I hadn't heard from her in years, quiet, stripped of performance, whether I had known for a long time. I told her the truth. 10 days, I said. She looked at the table. I left the room. Here is what happened afterward, because I think you deserve the whole truth, not just the satisfying part. Craig Hollis was formally charged with financial fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. His attorney tried twice to negotiate a quiet civil settlement instead. Patricia declined both times on my behalf. The case took 14 months, and it cost me more in legal fees than I would like to admit to. But Craig was convicted on 2 counts, received a substantial fine, was ordered to pay restitution, and lost his professional license. I did not attend the sentencing. I didn't need to be there for that. Diane and I divorced. It was not ugly, because I didn't allow it to become ugly, and to her credit, she didn't either. We split the properties on Cascade Drive and Fairview, according to what we'd each contributed to purchasing them, which turned out to be approximately equal. I kept the company and its trust structure. She kept the house, which was hers to keep her name, had always been on that deed alongside mine, and that was never something I wanted to dispute. We signed the final papers on a Thursday afternoon in November. And I drove home to the apartment I'd been renting near downtown Salem. And I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of water and thought, I built that company from nothing. It still exists. Rebecca's name is on it. That's enough. And it was. It genuinely was. Margaret Osei still manages the Cascade Drive property for me. The duplex on Fairview was part of Diane's settlement, but Margaret helped me find a new property manager for that transition with the same care she brings to everything else. I told her, about a month after the worst of it was finished, that I wanted to do something to acknowledge what she'd done. She shook her head in the way she does and said it wasn't necessary. I told her that was not her decision to make. I had already spoken with Patricia. The management contract for Cascade Drive was rewritten to give Margaret a 15% equity share in the building's net revenues, formalized, filed, and binding. I also wrote her a letter, not a legal document, just a letter telling her in plain English that her job, her contract, and her financial stake in that property were protected by legal structure and not by goodwill, and that what she had done on a Tuesday evening in March at a Chevron station on Rickey Street had meant everything to me. She called me after she read it. Gerald answered when I called back to confirm she'd received it, and he said, very simply, she cried, good tears. I'm not ashamed to tell you I had to clear my throat twice before I could respond. I'll tell you what I know now that I did not know on Tuesday, March 4th, at 6:17 in the evening. I know that loyalty is not a feeling. It's a pattern. It's showing up with the same green logbook to every meeting for 14 years. It's texting your employer on a Tuesday night with the words, I'm so sorry, because you understand that what you're about to say will hurt him, and you tell him anyway, because the alternative is to stay quiet and let the hurt happen differently and worse. I know that the people who will tell you the truth when it costs them something to do it are rare enough that when you find one, you build a structure around them that lasts longer than the crisis that revealed them. I know that 63 is not too old to start over. I know that a smaller life, honestly built, sits lighter on your shoulders than a larger one held together with things you pretended not to notice. I know that pressing charges was the right thing, not because it felt good it didn't, not exactly, but because crimes need their correct names, and letting a man slide because you once called him a friend is not mercy. It is simply fear of discomfort wearing mercy's clothes. And I know that the moment I signed Rebecca's name onto that trust document, not the moment Diane left, not the moment Craig's conviction came through, not any of the loud, dramatic moments people imagine, are the turning points. That was the moment I understood that what I'd built was still mine, that I hadn't lost it, that the people who tried to take it had failed before they even knew the clock had started running. If you're a father watching this tonight, or a grandfather, or a man who has spent decades doing the quiet, unglamorous work of building something real, a business, a home, a life worth handing down, hear me when I say this. Pay close attention to the people who have been consistent when there was nothing dramatic to be consistent for. The colleague who sends you the same update every Tuesday for 14 years. The neighbor who shovels your walk without being asked. The employee who keeps records nobody required them to keep. Those people are telling you something about who they are every single time, and most of us aren't paying enough attention until we desperately need to be. And if you ever find yourself sitting in a gas station parking lot at dusk, reading a text message that changes everything, do what I did. Don't go home yet. Sit still. Breathe. Call the right people in the right order. And whatever you do, do not mistake speed for strength. The best moves I made in those 10 days were the slow ones. If this story meant something to you tonight, hit subscribe and leave me a comment. Who in your life has been the Margaret? The one who told you the hard truth when staying quiet would have been so much easier. I'd genuinely like to know.